Oh, hey, it's been a while. I'm officially coming back from my little holiday vacation, and it's the new year, so I guess I got new stuff on the brain again. Now, I thought about that a little bit. Again, like last year, I don't really have a lot of like the hot newest games to talk about, so I guess that one's off the list. I thought about maybe doing new games that I got for Christmas this year, but that's just one game and an expansion, so I guess that's a no. So I did prototypes last year. I did kind of think about talking some more of those, but what I decided to go with was instead finally getting back to something I brought up in one of my old videos where I was talking about how I kind of had a while this obsession with new versions of old games. I've already done videos on these three. In fact, this is like my highest viewed video. You guys love Clue for some reason, except those escape room games. And now I'm thinking of hitting my 4 different card games for Monopoly. Funny enough, I have these 4 different Monopoly card games. One of them was never really fully released, but there's still one more Monopoly card game I don't have from the early 90s. It's crazy how many times Monopoly has tried to make a card game out of itself. Anyway, I think we'll start with this one over here. Out of the way, guys. Monopoly Deal. It's a game for 2 to 5 players, and you're just trying to be the first player to collect 3 sets of properties to win the game. It's a card game, so it's not really much to set up, just shuffle the deck and then deal each player 5 cards. That's it. There's a pretty large variety of cards in this game, but most of them break down just a few groups. The most important is probably the property cards. There's one for every property you could buy in the game. You will see each one shows you how many you need to form a complete set, be it 2, 3, or even 4. You can also see that each card has its own value, which we'll get into later, as well as how much rent you can charge for owning these properties, which again we'll get into more to later. There's also some wild properties in the game. You can have ones like these, which you can use as any property you want, match it with any color set, or you have some of these double color ones, which can be used as either of one of the 2 colors. So a blue or a green, a teal or a black, or whatever called mint maybe? Like I said earlier, the first player to complete 3 sets of properties ends up winning the game. There are money cards. Money cards are used to pay off rent so you don't have to mortgage off your properties. Then there are action cards, which let you steal property, gain money, charge rent, yada yada yada. Keep in mind the rent cards, there's ones like these which work for all properties, but there are also rent cards that work only on certain colors of properties. And hotels and houses to make your properties worth even more, just like Monopoly. Again though, you'll see that even these actions have monetary value. Let's get into that. At the start of your turn, you'll always draw 2 cards. Unless you start the turn with no cards in hand, then you're going to draw 5 cards. Sweet, right? Once you have your cards, you're going to get to play up to 3 cards. You don't have to play any though. You may play property cards to the table in front of you. Remember, collecting 3 different sets of these wins you the game. You may play action cards straight to the center discard pile. Simply read it aloud and do as it says. The last thing you can do is place money cards or action cards into your bank. That's where these values come into play. When you play a card in your bank, simply put it off to a pile on the side that is noted as your bank area, and the more you play there, just keep adding them stacked up like that. Now keep in mind in general that once you have played a card from your hand, it can never come back to your hand. So if you choose to put something into your bank, it stays in your bank. If you end up playing a property down, it stays on the table in front of you. Now, I've already talked about rent and all that, and you might have seen some cards that talk about players paying other players money, so let's get into how that works. Whenever someone decides to collect rent on one of their properties, or plays an action card that requires players to pay them, what a player is forced to do is to pay money from their bank to the player that equal or exceeds the amount owed. Now, you are not allowed to give change in this game. So, since this says to pay 1, if this was the bank of the player that had to pay, they'd have to give them this card worth 2 or this 5. Obviously the 2 is going to be the closest one to it. So they would give 2 to this player, they'd place it into their bank, and that extra $1 is just an extra dollar earned for them. Sorry. If there's a situation where someone played a card like this, all players give 2M, and a player like this one has no money in their bank, then they'll be forced to mortgage off their properties, which means you will have to give properties away that have a value that ends up equaling or exceeding the money you owe to that player. However, if you do not ever have enough money, then you just don't have to give them any more. You're already in a bad enough situation. Oh, and just to be clear, you're never allowed to play with any cards from your hand. You can only pay with money in your bank on the table or properties you already have on the table. Sorry. One more thing to confirm is, while this is a winning set because there are 3 different property sets, it is possible, thanks to wild cards, to collect full sets of the same property, like this. In a situation like this is not a winning hand because you have 1 set of the mints and 2 matching sets of blues, so this does not count. You will need a 3rd matching set of a different color to win. I think this is probably my favorite of my Monopoly card games. I think it does the best at balancing being a fun card game while also still having a lot of that Monopoly feeling to it. The collecting properties, charging rent, having people having to pay money. You know, it's a lot of fun when someone is having to give you that property that they were almost collected on, but they've got to pay you off because they just don't have enough. So it's really great having to screw your friends over for mortgage and all that, collecting the big rents. So yeah, I think this one, out of all the ones I have, again, has the best balance of the group of feeling like a fun card game and still feeling like Monopoly. It's a pretty simple game, so I would say pretty much all adults should be able to figure out how to go about it. There's not a whole lot to it. There's a lot of different cards, but in the end, there's not so much going on that you can't understand it after a game or so. As far as littler kids go, that's probably going to be a problem. I imagine this is probably not the best game to play with really young kids. It says 8 and up, and that's probably about right. But otherwise, yeah, I have a good time with it. Again, I've talked about how I like the balance. The difficulty is at a good spot, I think, for most families and casual gamers. Yeah, Monopoly deal. This is Baron approved, y'all.